I'm Phil, and I bound a fanfic so massive that I had to DIY my own tool just to trim it to size. My friend recently had an important birthday, and their favourite book is the fanfic Manacled. Now, there's no ethical way to pay for a physical copy of a fanfic without infringing on the IP of the original universe. If you sell it, the original author loses out, and legal cases could endanger the entire fanfic ecosystem. So, the only ethical approach is to keep it free for everyone. That said, there's nothing stopping us from taking a story from a site like AO3 and turning it into a physical book for ourselves, or as a gift to a friend. To save myself a little time, I used a beautiful pre-made typeset from Katia Esteves, which features incredible illustrations from lots of artists. Many of the most iconic pieces are by Avendell. As their work features heavily in the typeset, I thought it would feel right at home on the cover as well, and when I drew up my ideas for foiling the leather strips, these pieces just slotted in perfectly to complete it. They're a really brilliant artist, and if you love these pieces, I've linked their Redbubble shop in the description so you can support them directly. This isn't an ad, I just wanted to send some love their way for making this book look so good. I wanted this to be a single massive volume, but the typeset was originally split into 3. That meant I needed to do a light edit in Affinity Publisher to combine them, followed by a process called imposition, which is basically reordering the pages so they're in the right sequence once you fold them. I used a great free tool called bookbinder.js for that. Once the digital work was done, it was time to head to the workshop. The scale of this really started to sink in at the printer. It took 2 days just to print and fold the signatures. This book has 66 signatures, plus 2 more for the Endpapers and waste sheets. It feels odd to blast through this time-lapse in seconds when it consumed my life for days, but it's kind of boring to see me print and fold paper, so here we are. I wanted the spine to be flexible, so I went with lots of smaller signatures rather than fewer thick ones, to give the spine more places to bend. But that introduced another problem: swell. My calculations showed that with these extra stitches and folds, my standard linen thread would give me about 50% swell, way too much, and would turn the book into a wedge. So I swapped to a thin silk thread and made sure to press each fold flat with my bone folder after sewing them. This worked a little too well, and I actually overshot my goal of between 20 to 30% swell, but for my first time sewing a book this size, I think it went really well. Before gluing the spine, I had to think about the foredge. I wanted it rounded, which meant trimming it before rounding the spine, so it gets pulled into a curve as you manipulate the spine. If I wanted the foredge to be straight, I'd have to cut it after rounding the spine. Both are valid aesthetic choices, but on a big book like this, I personally think the curve looks a bit better. This meant I had to come up with a way to trim through all these pages. This thick book is about 3 times my guillotine's capacity, and that led me down a Reddit rabbit hole, where I found the Kebab blade DIY book plough that I made in my last video. It works really great, and once that was built, I put the first coat of glue on the spine, making sure to avoid the tapes. I'm not trying to lock everything in place here, just tack it so the pages are attached to each other, but can still be shaped. Once the glue was dry to the touch, but still flexible, I pulled it out of the press, measured for the reference marks, and aligned it all in the press again before cutting the foredge. Other than some test cuts with the first version of the book plough, this was the first time I'd used it on an actual text block. It was a really satisfying process, and it's made for some really satisfying footage as well. After I trimmed all the way through the foredge, it was on to rounding and backing the spine. I followed a DAS bookbinding tutorial for this. It's an essential step for the longevity of a heavy book, as it prevents the text block from sagging as much over time. I dampened my fingertips for grip, as DAS suggests to do, and used gentle glancing blows with the hammer to shape the arch. Later, I used my own 3D printed backing boards to form the shoulders. Real brass-faced boards are kind of pricey, so these are a great DIY alternative if you have a 3D printer. They were really simple to model, but let me know if you'd be interested in me sharing the design files. I finished the spine by gluing the tapes, adding spacers between the tapes, lining it all with some mull, paper and a spine hollow. Then I could get everything to dimension with a quick trim on the top and bottom, give it a light sand on the foredge, and finish the edges with a metallic copper acrylic ink applied using an old toothbrush to give a speckled appearance. Pro tip, it gets everywhere, so mask everything off that's important to you. All that was left for the text block prep was to add the headbands. I forgot to leave space for these when gluing up the spine, but it wasn't a big deal to trim and peel away a clearing for them. I felt that the pre-made headbands I have on hand looked a bit silly on such a thick book, and I didn't have time to sew real custom headbands, so I opted to make my own with some spare book cloth and some chunky string. If you're doing this, make sure to leave a little tab of cloth on the end to fold down and hide the raw edge of the string when you trim it to size and glue them onto the spine. Next, I made the cover boards by laminating 2 sheets of 1mm grey board, but only gluing out half so that it makes split boards. This is so you can turn the waste sheets, ribbon and mull into tabs that you then stick into these slots to securely integrate the boards as part of the binding for maximum strength. This was the last of the structural work, and after trimming the boards to have the same overhang as the top and bottom, it was on to decoration. I designed the cover to be a quarter binding to make use of the leftover leather from my Kobo case project. I used my Cricut and a foil quill to hot foil stamp the copper chain trim and spine icons, which I then sealed with an acrylic finisher for some abrasion resistance. I did have a heart-sinking moment where I skived the leather too deep and cut right through on one edge. But a little PVA, an offcut of leather, and some black leather paint to hide the raw seam saved it, and it all ended up getting covered by the paper inlay anyway. I also changed out the PVA that I used for the leather on my Kobo case in favour of wheat flour paste in this bind. It gives you so much more working time to massage the leather into place, and it's so easy to make out of stuff that you already have around the house. Definitely give it a go the next time that you need to use real leather on a book. I printed the cover illustrations on smooth paper with my inkjet, used a laser printer, toner foil and a foiling machine for the shiny copper title, sealed everything with the same acrylic finisher that I used on the leather, but sprayed through my airbrush as the paper is way easier to see brush marks on. I let them dry before trimming them to size, gluing them out and setting them in place, pressing them to dry overnight. The next morning I had a few touch-ups to do. The paper split on one spot as it folded around the board on the inside of the front cover. I colour matched the area with some acrylic paint to camouflage the tear. I also ran a line of acrylic finisher around the whole paper section of the cover to protect the cut edges and give it some resistance to lifting, making sure to apply another thicker layer where it folds around the boards to give those edges some extra abrasion resistance, as this is where most of the wear will happen as it slides in and out of the bookshelves. The final step, pasting down the end papers, is always the scariest. I should have used reinforced fabric hinges on the end papers for a book this heavy, but I overlooked that and I had to try reinforcing the hinges with some strips of mull. I paid extra attention to pushing the paper deep into the hinge while bending it backwards and forwards. A wrinkle in the hinge that nobody will open wide enough to see is way better than the paper drying too taut and tearing when you first open the book. I placed it in the press again, overnight, and, minus a couple of touch-ups here and there, it was ready for the reveal. So, what do you think of my take on a Manacled bind? Do you have a favourite fanfic that you'd like to turn into a physical book? This project stretched me as a maker way more than I expected, and took considerably longer than I thought it would too. Now I just have to wrap this up and deliver it, only a few weeks late for my friend's birthday. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone that you think will enjoy it. It really helps out the channel, and I'm always free to answer questions in the comments if you have any. Thank you all so much for watching. See you next time.